This is the story of something that still gives me chills when I think about it. I'm going to tell you what happened that night in the hotel room. Something I can never forget. So just sit back and listen carefully. Don't miss anything, because every little detail matters. It all started 2 years ago, when I had to travel for a business conference. The company had booked me into this fancy-looking hotel on the edge of the city. From the outside, it looked modern and beautiful. Big glass windows, shining lights, and a nice lobby with polite staff. Everything felt normal, but sometimes, the most normal-looking places hide the darkest things. I checked in late in the evening. My room was on the 9th floor, room number 913. The elevator ride was quiet, and the hallway was strangely empty. You know that weird silence in hotels? Where it's too quiet, like even sound is afraid to move. That was the feeling I got the moment I stepped out on the 9th floor. As I walked to my room, I noticed something strange. Every door on the floor looked identical, but when I got closer to 913, the air felt colder. Not just the air-conditioned kind of cold, but cold like something was wrong, like someone had just walked over my grave. I ignored it. Maybe I was just tired. I slid the key card into the lock, the green light blinked, and I stepped inside. At first glance, the room looked fine, clean, simple. White sheets, wooden furniture, a small TV, and a large mirror on the wall across from the bed. But the moment I closed the door behind me, I felt it again. That drop in temperature. Like the room had been empty for a long time and I wasn't supposed to be there. I turned on all the lights and walked around. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake off that feeling. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the closet. Empty. But then, as I was walking back to the bed, I thought I saw something move in the mirror, just for a second, like a shadow passing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I laughed at myself. "You're tired," I told myself. "It's just your imagination." Still, I kept the lights on. I didn't even bother to unpack my suitcase. I ordered a small dinner, watched some random news channel, and tried to fall asleep. The bed was soft, but my eyes kept going to the mirror. I don't know why. Something about it didn't feel right. Around 2 a.m. I woke up suddenly. I didn't even know why. No sound, no knock, no phone call. Just something pulled me out of sleep. And the first thing I noticed? The lights were off. I was 100% sure I had left them on. All of them. I reached for the lamp next to the bed and turned it on. The second the light came back, I felt this tightness in my chest. Like the room didn't like the light. Like something inside had been moving in the dark and froze the moment I turned it back on. That's when I looked at the mirror. There was a handprint on it. A clear, wet-looking handprint right in the center. It was not mine. I hadn't touched that mirror, and it looked fresh, like someone had just pressed their hand against it a few seconds ago. I stared at it, frozen. My brain tried to explain it. Maybe a cleaner forgot to wipe it? Maybe I did touch it earlier and forgot, but deep down, I knew. That print wasn't there before. I stood up slowly, walked to the mirror, and reached out with my hand. The surface was cold. I wiped the print away with the sleeve of my shirt. Then I looked behind the mirror. Nothing. Just a solid wall. Trying to act brave, I said out loud, "If anyone's here, I don't care. I'm sleeping." Dumb thing to say, I know. But sometimes we say things to ourselves just to feel better. I turned the lights back on, every single one, and got back in bed. I lay there, eyes wide open, watching the mirror. I must have dozed off again because the next thing I remember, I was waking up to a sound. Knock. A slow, soft knock on the door. Checked my phone. It was 3:13 a.m. Another knock. Still soft, but clear. I got up quietly, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I stood there for a moment, confused, heart pounding. Then I heard it again. Knock. But not on the door, this time on the mirror. I turned slowly, and there it was. A woman, standing inside the mirror. She wasn't just a reflection, she was inside it. Her face pale, her eyes dark, her long black hair hanging wet over her face, and she was staring straight at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stared. Then she lifted her hand and knocked again. Knock, knock, and the mirror cracked. A thin line appeared across it from top to bottom. Then another line across her face. The cracks started spreading like spiderwebs. But the glass didn't fall. It just stayed there, broken, with her face still staring at me through the cracks. I backed away slowly, grabbed my phone and tried to take a photo. The screen was black. The phone wouldn't turn on. I pressed every button, but nothing worked. That's when I heard a whisper. It wasn't coming from the mirror. It was behind me, right next to my ear. Leave. I ran. I didn't even take my bag. I opened the door, sprinted down the hallway to the elevator, and hit the ground floor button 100 times. When the doors closed, I finally breathed again. The front desk guy looked shocked when I stormed into the lobby at 3:20 in the morning, asking for a new room or a cab or anything. He kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't even explain. I just said, "Room 913. There's something wrong. Don't send anyone else there." You know the strangest part? He didn't look surprised. He looked like he already knew. He nodded, slowly, and said, "You're not the first one." I asked him what he meant, but he just gave me another room, on the 4th floor, and told me not to worry. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I checked out early. Before leaving, I asked one of the cleaning staff if she knew anything about room 913. She hesitated, then whispered, "A woman jumped from that window 10 years ago. She was staying in that room. No one likes cleaning it. Sometimes we hear things, but we're told not to talk about it. So that's my story. Believe it or not, it happened. And I never stayed in a hotel room ending in 13 ever again. Even today, when I see a mirror, I look twice. Just to make sure no one's looking back. Now tell me, would you stay in room 913? Because I wouldn't. Not even for $1 million. This is the story of something that happened to my friend Mark, and I swear to you, it's the kind of thing you only hear about in movies. But Mark isn't the type to make up stories. He's logical, calm, even boring sometimes. So when he told me what happened in that hotel room, I knew he was telling the truth. And now, I'm going to tell you. But only if you're ready to hear something that might mess with your head. Mark had been on a business trip to a small town near the coast. His company booked him into this quiet, old-fashioned hotel called the Crescent Arms. It looked like one of those places that used to be fancy decades ago, but now just had peeling wallpaper and too many shadows. You know what I mean? Still, it was close to the meeting location, so he didn't complain. He checked in on a rainy Tuesday night. The receptionist was this pale young guy who barely looked up from his computer. Just handed him a key and said, "Room 309. Didn't smile. Didn't say welcome. Just those 2 words. Mark took the elevator, and as it creaked upward, he felt something weird. Like the whole building was holding its breath. The 3rd floor was oddly silent. No TVs, no voices, just this thick, heavy kind of quiet that made his ears feel stuffed. Room 309 was at the end of the hallway. As he unlocked the door, the key felt sticky, like someone had dipped it in something and wiped it off badly. But whatever. He just wanted to crash for the night. The room was off. Not in an obvious way, it was clean. The bed was made. But the air felt stale, like no one had opened a window in years. And there was this strange odor. Not foul, just like old perfume and burnt metal. Hard to explain. The weirdest thing, though, was the closet. It was this tall wooden thing standing directly across from the bed. Old, scratched, and locked with a rusted chain that wrapped around the handles. Not like hotel closets usually are. Mark thought maybe it was just storage or out of use, so he didn't pay much attention. He called room service, ate, took a shower, and got into bed around midnight. Tried watching something on his laptop, but the Wi-Fi kept cutting out. Eventually, he gave up and decided to sleep. That's when things started to get strange. Around 2 a.m., he woke up to a noise, a soft creaking like old wood shifting. He sat up and looked around. The closet door had moved, just a little. Not open, but the chain was now loose, like it had been pulled. He stared at it for a good minute, wondering if maybe he was dreaming, or if it had always been that way. Then something tapped from inside it. 3 soft knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Mark froze. He told me later he didn't move for almost 10 minutes. Just sat there in bed, staring at the closet. Eventually he grabbed the desk chair and wedged it under the doorknob. Then he went back to bed, heart pounding. And as soon as he turned off the light, the tapping started again. This time, it was faster, desperate. Tap, 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 tap. He turned the light back on. Silence. He didn't sleep after that. He sat in the corner of the room, light on, chair against the closet, all night long. In the morning, everything looked normal again. The chain was tight around the closet. The chair hadn't moved. But Mark was done. He went to the front desk and told the guy he wanted a different room. The receptionist didn't even ask why, just handed him a new key. Room 215, the new room, was better, brighter, and no creepy closet. Just a modern wardrobe with mirrors. Still, Mark couldn't shake the feeling from the night before. So before going to bed, he checked every corner of the room. Under the bed, inside the wardrobe, even behind the curtains. Nothing. But just as he was about to sleep, he noticed something strange in the mirror. When he walked past it for a split second, just a flicker, he thought he saw someone behind. Him, a figure, not clear, but there. He turned around, empty room. He tried it again. Walked past the mirror slowly, watching the reflection carefully. Nothing. He told himself he was imagining things, that it was just leftover fear from the first room. He got into bed, turned off the lights, and forced himself to sleep. But around 3 a.m., he woke up again, not to noise, but to cold. The room was freezing. His breath came out in white puffs. He checked the thermostat. It said 72 Kodigov, but it felt like a freezer. Then he heard the whisper, right next to his ear. Mark. He sat up, heart slamming in his chest. There was no one there. And then the closet door, the one in this room, creaked, open on its own. He hadn't even noticed it had a closet when he checked in. It was built into the wall with sliding wooden doors. But now, one side had slid open halfway, even though he was sure he hadn't touched it. And from the dark inside, he saw a shape, not clear, just a figure, thin, pale, with a long neck and no visible face. He jumped out of bed, turned on every light and grabbed his suitcase. No way was he staying a second longer. He rushed to the front desk, sweating, panicking, and told the guy everything. The receptionist finally looked up, really looked at him and said, "You saw her, didn't you?" Mark stared. The man sighed and leaned forward. This hotel used to be a private residence. Back in the 1920s, the owner had a daughter, Very quiet. Strange, they said. She barely spoke. Spent all her time in her closet. They found her body there one winter. She had locked herself inside. No one knows why. Mark didn't respond. He just left. Got in a cab, drove to the next town. Didn't even ask for a refund. A few days later, he checked his phone. He had taken a photo of the room. The first one. Room 309, right before going to bed. In the photo, near the closet, there was a shape, a shadow. And if you brighten the image, you can see something that looks like a face. No eyes, no mouth. Just a long white face staring directly at the camera. That's why I'm telling you this. Hotels may look the same. Clean beds, warm lighting, kind staff. But you never know what's behind a locked closet, and sometimes they open on their own. This is the story of a weekend trip that went terribly wrong. It happened to a girl named Emily, someone I went to college with. She was sweet, kind, always smiling. Never the type you'd expect to be involved in something dark. But after what she went through in that hotel room, she was never the same again. And now I'm going to tell you what she told me. Emily had planned a relaxing getaway for herself. Just 2 days in the countryside, away from work, noise, and people. She booked a room at a quiet little place called Hollow Pines Hotel. A quaint building surrounded by woods, old-fashioned and cozy looking from the outside. She arrived on a Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. The air was cool, and the trees around the hotel looked beautiful in the golden light. But even then, Emily said, there was something strange. Like the trees leaned too close to the building. Like they were listening. At the front desk was a woman in her 50s, thin and pale, with a stiff smile that never quite reached her eyes. She handed Emily the room key and said, "You'll be in room 6, upstairs, second on the left." "Thank you," Emily said. The woman gave a slow nod and added, "If you hear anything during the night, just stay in your bed." Emily laughed, thinking it was a joke. But the woman didn't laugh with her. She just said, "It's better that way." Room 6 was simple. A queen-sized bed, wooden furniture, and a window that looked out into the forest. Everything looked clean enough, but the air smelled a little musty. Not awful, just old. She put her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and lay back on the bed with a book. A little while later, she heard footsteps upstairs, but when she asked the woman at the desk earlier, she'd been told the hotel was nearly empty. Maybe 1 or 2 other guests. Still, the footsteps continued for hours. Back and forth, slow, heavy. But there wasn't a floor above her room. The hotel was only 2 stories. She was on the top floor. She tried to ignore it. Later that night, around 11:30 p.m., Emily was brushing her teeth in the bathroom when she heard a knock at her door. 3 knocks. Slow. She froze, toothbrush in hand. She went to the door and called out, "Hello?" No answer. She waited a moment, then opened the door just a little. No one was there. She looked both ways down the hallway. Empty. She closed the door and locked it, then pushed the little wooden desk in front of it for good measure. That night, she couldn't sleep. There was a scratching noise like fingernails on wood. It wasn't coming from the walls, but from under the bed. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but the sound grew louder. Scratch, scratch, scratch. She leaned over the edge of the bed, pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it under. Nothing. Just shadows. She lay back down, but the moment she did, she felt the mattress sink slightly, like someone had sat down at the edge. She shot up, heart racing. No one was there. The desk was still against the door. The window was locked. She was alone, but she didn't feel alone. She spent the rest of the night with the lights on, sitting in a corner, watching the bed. The next morning, she went downstairs to ask for a different room, but the woman at the front desk wasn't there. Instead, there was a man in his late 60s sitting behind the counter, reading a newspaper. Emily explained what had happened the night before. The knocking, the scratching, the footsteps. The man lowered the paper and looked at her with sad eyes. "You were in room 6?" he asked. She nodded. He sighed and rubbed his face. "That room's supposed to be closed," he said. "I told Martha not to use it anymore." "Why?" Emily asked. "There was a girl," he said. "Long time ago. She stayed in that room with her parents. One night she disappeared. No one knows how. The door was locked from the inside, window shut tight. They searched for days." Emily felt her stomach twist. "They never found her?" she asked. He shook his head. "Some say she never left the room." That afternoon, Emily packed her things. She didn't want to stay another night. The man apologized again and told her she could have a free stay if she ever came back. She said no thanks. But here's where it gets really strange. When she got home, she unpacked her suitcase and found something she hadn't packed. It was a small porcelain doll, pale face, black eyes, and a red dress, sitting right on top of her clothes. Emily screamed and dropped it. She called the hotel right away, furious. The man answered. She told him about the doll. There was a long pause on the other end. "Red dress?" he asked. "Yes," she said. I think that belonged to the girl." Emily felt sick. She threw the doll in the trash. But later that night, while brushing her teeth, she saw something behind her in the mirror. A little girl, standing just outside the bathroom door. She spun around. Nothing. She ran to the trash can to check. The doll was gone. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat on her bed, door locked, lights on, clutching a kitchen knife in her hand. And then, at 3:07 a.m., her bedroom door creaked open slowly. It had been locked. But it opened on its own, and sitting in the doorway was the doll. This time, Emily didn't scream. She picked it up and drove all the way to the river at the edge of town. She stood on the bridge and threw the doll into the water, watching it sink below the surface. She thought it was over. But a week later, she got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside the box, the same doll, dry, clean, still wearing the red dress. After that, Emily moved, changed her phone number, changed her name. I haven't seen her in years, but I'll never forget the last thing she told me. Sometimes, when I wake up at night, I hear knocking from under the bed. She paused, then whispered, and sometimes I knock back. This is the story of something truly terrifying that happened to my cousin Mark. And once I tell you this, I promise, you'll never look at hotel rooms the same way again. It was last year, around November. Mark had just landed a new job that required a lot of travel. He was excited about it. New cities, fancy hotels, and finally earning good money. His first assignment sent him to a small town in northern England. Nothing too far, just quiet, surrounded by woods and hills. He was supposed to stay there for 2 nights and attend a business seminar. His company booked him into a place called the Elmshade Inn. He told me it looked charming online. Red bricks, ivy-covered walls, a big wooden sign out front. It had that old English charm. But as soon as he arrived, Mark said something about it felt off. The woman at the front desk, Ms. Delaney, was polite but cold. She gave him the key to room 13, which Mark didn't think twice about. He wasn't superstitious or anything. The room was on the 3rd floor, right at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The carpet looked old and the lights flickered slightly, but again, he brushed it off. Now here's the first weird thing. When he got to his room and unlocked the door, the light switch didn't work at first. He flicked it up and down a few times, and only after the third or fourth try did the light finally come on. The bulb above buzzed loudly and glowed a dull yellow. The room looked normal. Small bed, a wooden desk, an armchair near the window. But something about it felt used. Like someone had just been there, like the air still held their breath. The mirror above the desk had smudge marks on it, almost like fingerprints that had been half wiped away. Again, he tried not to think too much of it. He unpacked, called his girlfriend to say he'd arrived safely, and then went down for dinner. The food was good, the staff friendly enough. But when he went back to his room later that night, things started to get strange. It started with a sound, a knock. Not on the door. From inside the room. Mark had just gotten into bed when he heard 3 slow knocks. Thump, thump, thump. Coming from inside the wardrobe. At first, he froze. He stared at the wardrobe, unsure if he had imagined it. He waited. Silence. He got up, walked to the wardrobe, yanked it open. Nothing. Just his coat hanging there. He chuckled nervously, calling himself paranoid. Maybe the building was just old. Creaks and groans, that kind of thing. He went back to bed. A few minutes later, he heard it again. Thump, thump, thump. This time from under the bed. Mark didn't move right away. He just stared at the ceiling, his heart pounding. Slowly, he leaned over the edge of the bed and looked underneath. Nothing. Empty. No dust. No storage boxes. Nothing. That night, he barely slept. He kept the light on and stayed under the covers, wide awake. Around 3:30 a.m., just as he was starting to drift off, he heard whispering. It was soft, low, and coming from the corner near the wardrobe. He couldn't make out the words. It sounded like someone was repeating something over and over, whispering in a dry, raspy voice. He turned toward the corner, and the whispering stopped. That was the final straw for him. Mark got out of bed, dressed quickly, and went downstairs to ask for a different room. But the reception was empty. The lights in the lobby were off. The front door was locked with a chain. He even tried to call a taxi from his phone, but there was no signal. None at all. And when he looked out the window, the street was pitch black. Not even the street lights were on. So he went back to his room. He moved the armchair in front of the door and stayed awake until morning. Now here's where it gets even worse. In the morning, he went downstairs again, and there was Ms. Delaney at the desk, smiling like everything was normal. He asked her politely, but firmly, to switch his room. She raised an eyebrow and said, "You were in 13, weren't you?" Mark nodded. She hesitated, then leaned in and said, "We usually keep that room locked. You must have gotten the wrong key." He was confused. "You gave it to me." She frowned. "No, sir. I checked the log. I assigned you room 9. Mark pulled out the key from his pocket. "Room 13. She looked shocked. "I don't know how you got that," she whispered. He didn't care. He took the key for room 9 and moved all his things. That night in room 9 was perfectly normal. Quiet. Comfortable. No knocks. No whispers. Just peaceful sleep. The next morning, while checking out, he asked Ms. Delaney about room 13. She looked uncomfortable. Then she said, "That room, it's been empty since 2016. A guest died in there. We don't let anyone stay in it anymore." Mark asked what happened. "A man," she said, "business traveler, came in on a rainy night, checked in, went to bed, and never woke up. They found him the next morning. No signs of injury. Just a look on his face like he'd seen something awful before he died. Mark asked, "What kind of look?" She hesitated, then said, "Like he saw something standing over his bed, but couldn't scream." After that, Mark left. Drove 5 hours home instead of taking the train. He didn't say a word to anyone for a few days. Finally, he told me everything. And I'm telling you now because I believe him. I believe every single word. Oh, and one more thing. When he unpacked his suitcase, he found something strange at the bottom. A small piece of paper, old, yellowed, handwritten. It said, "Still here. No one knows how it got there." He burned it. But sometimes, when he's really tired or half asleep, he says he hears it again. That soft, whispering voice from the corner, and always the same words. Room 13. This is the story of something that happened to a friend of mine, Sarah. She wasn't someone who scared easily. Smart, independent, a little too brave for her own good. But after this trip, she told me she'd never stay in a hotel alone again. Ever. And once I tell you what happened, you'll understand why. It was early autumn. The leaves were turning orange, the air was cool, and Sarah had to travel to a small coastal town in southern England for a photography project. She was supposed to spend 3 days capturing shots of the cliffs, the ocean, and the local historic buildings. The town wasn't big, so choices for places to stay were limited. She ended up booking a room in an old hotel called the Wayfarers Rest. It looked charming in the pictures. Stone walls, bay windows, a garden out back. But in person, she said, it felt different. Not bad exactly, just too quiet. Too still, the kind of place where you whisper without realizing why. When she arrived, the lobby was empty. There was a bell on the front desk, and after ringing it, an old man appeared. He introduced himself as Mr. Harper, the owner. Friendly enough, but he moved slowly, like his bones ached with every step. He handed her a brass key and said, "You've got room 6. Overlooks the back garden. Should be peaceful." Sarah smiled, thanked him, and headed up the narrow staircase. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and something sweet, maybe lilacs or lavender. Her room was at the end of the hall, and when she opened the door, she paused. It was clean, cozy even. Wooden floors, a soft bed, a writing desk by the window. But the light coming in felt dim, like the sun was being filtered through something. Gray. And the mirror above the dresser was covered with a white cloth. That struck her as odd. She walked over and pulled the cloth off. The mirror looked old, wavy glass. But something about it made her stomach twist a little. She stared at her own reflection for a moment and felt watched. Not from behind, but from inside the mirror. She laughed it off, blaming the long drive. Later that evening, after taking photos around the town, she returned to the room, made herself some tea, and curled up in bed with her laptop. Everything seemed fine, quiet, until midnight. That's when she heard the knock, just a single knock, tap on the door. She froze. Who would knock at midnight? She waited a moment, then got up and opened the door. No one was there. The hallway was empty. She stepped out, looked around, then closed the door and locked it. Told herself it was probably just the building creaking or maybe someone knocking on the wrong door. But as she got back into bed, she heard it again. Tap. This time, it was the window. Her room was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no tree, nearby. Just empty space beneath the window. She slowly turned and looked. Nothing. She walked over, looked out. Darkness. Just the garden below, and the shadows of tall bushes swaying gently in the breeze. She shut the curtains tight and decided to just sleep it off. It had been a long day, and she figured her mind was playing tricks. But that night, she had the worst dream. In it, she was lying in bed, exactly as she was. The room looked the same, except everything had a gray-blue tint, like moonlight through dirty glass. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. And standing in the corner, just by the mirror, was a tall woman in a black dress. The woman's face was blurred like smoke behind glass, and her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, just slightly wrong. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there staring at Sarah with no eyes. Sarah woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. It was 3:03 a.m. The room was dead silent. But the mirror was fogged up, like someone had been breathing on it. She hadn't turned on any heat. There was no reason for that mirror to fog. She walked up to it slowly, heart in her throat, and wiped it with her sleeve. And there, in the middle of the glass, were 5 long, faint finger streaks, like someone had dragged their hand down the other side. She stepped back, staring at it, trying to stay calm, trying to find a logical explanation, but there wasn't one. The next morning, she went downstairs and asked Mr. Harper if someone had ever died in room 6. He blinked, clearly surprised. Then he said, "Why would you ask that?" Sarah told him. About the knocking, the mirror, the dream. She expected him to laugh or tell her it was nonsense, but he didn't. Instead, he sighed and said, "That room's been a problem since my wife passed. She loved that room. Used to sit in the chair by the window every morning with her tea. After she died, I tried keeping the room closed for a while, but I couldn't afford to leave it empty." Sarah asked how she died. "Fell down the stairs," he said softly. "Some say she saw something in the mirror before it happened. Said she started acting strange the last week of her life, talking to the mirror, whispering to it." Sarah asked if anyone else had complained. He nodded. "A few guests said they heard her knocking, saw her in their dreams. One man said she asked him to follow her into the mirror." Sarah checked out early, drove home that day, and never looked back. A few weeks later, she developed the photos from her trip. Most of them were stunning: cliffs, sunsets, waves crashing against rocks. But one photo stood out. It was a shot of the back garden taken from her room. She didn't remember taking it. In the photo, everything looked fine, except in the bottom corner of the window frame. There was a reflection, a face, blurry, pale, eyes dark and wide, tilted, like it was staring back at her through the glass. She deleted the photo. But to this day, she swears she sometimes hears a soft tap at her window, especially on cold nights. And no matter where she stays, hotel or home, she always covers the mirrors before going to sleep. Always. Because once you've seen her, she never stops watching.